In this video, I'm going to talk about the documentation plan for the DHIS2 Core Team, Yemen. The main points that we're going to discuss are the content, organization and structure, Google Docs, moving to GitHub, DHIS2 Documentation, and then having an official DHIS2 Documentation GitHub repository. First of all, the content. Because the DHIS2 is divided into different categories, there are several guides or manuals. There's the user guide, the implementer guide, the developer guide, and the sysadmin guide. And each one has a specific purpose. So the first thing that we need to decide or agree on for each document is to have a clear purpose for each guide, for each document. If it's going to be for the users, and probably we're going to document the training that we do, and while documenting the training that we do and the workshops that we do, we're going to be able to build and add to the content of the user guide. During the implementation of the DHIS2 system and the several instances that we use, or the actual instance that we are building on, we can document this process in the sysadmin guide. If in the future we decide to customize apps for the DHIS2 system in Yemen, then maybe we can add the developer DHIS2 documentation guide or a developer guide. And of course, throughout the whole DHIS2 implementation, we're going to have an implementer guide. Depending on the purpose, we could either use the English language or decide to keep it in Arabic. But this is going to be the decision of the team. An important point that I read from the DHIS2 Implementer Documentation Guide is one of the key concepts to keep in mind while documenting is that, or while authoring the documentation, is that the content of the document should be considered first. So that's the first thing that we need to agree on, the content. And then when we have agreed on the content for the document, we're going to work on the organization and structure of the content. Each section will have structural elements, the title, the headings, and this is going to help us to divide the guide into sections. Because when the work is divided into sections, we can assign others to complete certain sections, and the document, instead of being a very complex and complicated work, is going to be divided into smaller pieces. Then when we have the idea of what the content is going to be and how we decide to organize and structure the document, we can use Google Docs. Google Docs is good for the collaboration, makes it easy to add content and suggest edits. In addition to ease of use and sharing with everybody in the team and maybe viewers from that are not in the team. Additionally, Google Docs allows version control. If we decide to update the document and then decide that an older version is better, we can always go back. So I think as a start, when we put it all together, when we put the content, the organization and structure in Google Docs, we are going to be able to move to GitHub. Why GitHub? Because the DHIS2 official documentation is on GitHub. Most software developers are using GitHub. So in the end, when we have something that's ready, when we have the basic content that is well structured, it will be easy to move to GitHub. luckily, we have a guide in moving to GitHub. In the implementer guide, there is a chapter called the documentation guide, which actually guides us through how to get started with GitHub, getting the document source, editing the documentation, and using the markup language that GitHub requires. The positive thing about having the documentation in GitHub is then we can easily export it to HTML web pages, we can export it to PDF and several other formats. Then when we are on GitHub, we have an official online DHIS2 documentation, and this will make it in the future a preferable way to make updates, to fork the documentation, to fork the repository by other teams. And if we decide to make the documentation in Arabic, then maybe other countries that are Arabic speaking countries can fork our documentation and update on it. Or maybe we can also update our documentation to make a translation for the DHIS2 documentation. The references that I used is the DHIS2 documentation, but the workshop that we are going to need to plan for this DHIS2 documentation to work is going to be first offline, and then when we have a workshop and we have agreed as a team these main points, or maybe other additional points that may come up, we are going to be able, after knowing all of this, to work online through Google Docs and in the future through GitHub, because working virtually with collaboration will make documentation easy and less time consuming. So after workshop, we can work virtually. The reference that I used is the DHIS2 Implementer guide, which we are going to need when working with GitHub. And based on my experience in Google Docs, I think it's going to be a very preferable start for everybody. Thank you so much. Presenting this presentation, Al-Gassim Sharafuddin, coordinator in the DHIS2 Core Team, Yemen. Thank you.